Hi everybody, welcome to this solution video to an OOP test in Java. Let's get started. Here we have the situation. There's a player class and there's the team class. Each class has properties and methods. Interestingly, the team class has an array of players. So there's some aggregation here. Notice that because we have accessor and mutator methods, we can assume that the properties are private. Complete the UML diagram showing the relationship between the two classes. A team has players. This is an example of aggregation. We'd have a line coming out of the team class connecting to a diamond which connects to the team class. That shows us aggregation. A team has players. The setPoints method of the player class, there it is, takes an integer, yes it does, as a parameter and adds it to the points scored. So implement the setPoints method. Pretty straightforward. Everything's happening in the same class. So we're updating points scored with the parameter. Okay, so there's a solution to the setPoints method of the player class. The setPoints method is a mutator method. Explain the purpose of a mutator method. A mutator method allows us to change values in a private property of a class. Something like that. Now here we have in D a main driver class, and we construct a team. We use the team class's addPlayer method to add players to the class. Now actually there's a mistake here because we know when we construct a player object, we also need a position. Okay, so the question is not actually complete. However, let's continue. So we add players to the team. Notice that the addPlayer method, there it is, in the team class, takes a player object and probably adds it to our player array players. That's what's happening here. Okay? While the game is playing, we get the player name, we get the player points, and we call the addPoints method of the team class. I know the addPoints method is a member of the team class because T1 is a team variable. Okay, so we take a string, we take an integer, we look through the player array of the team. Remember, the team has a player array. We're going to search that array and see if we can find a player with that name, and if we find that player, we will give that player those points. Now remember, each element of this array is a player. So if we want to find a player in the array which has this name, we're going to need to use a method because these properties are private. So we're going to use the getName method. And if we want to give this player some points, we're going to use the setPoints method. Okay? So the addPoints method is going to search the array for a player which has a certain name, and if we find that player, we're going to give that player some points. Okay? So let's look at the solution to the addPoints method of the player class. So let's go into, the team class. This is the team class. So public doesn't return anything. Void addPoints. We're looking for someone and we're going to give them some points. Now what I'm going to do is, this method is in the same class as the player array. Brilliant. Let's loop through this array. Okay, so let's break this down a bit. Get the current player. Let's do it this way. Player P is the current player. Let's just grab the current player that we're processing. Let's do this. P is a player. Every player has a getName method. Yes, p.getName. So we've got the name. If, in fact, this is name and this is a name. I'm going to call this p name just to separate these variables. If p name dot equals the parameter name, I'm going to call the players, p is a player, set points. And I'm going to send these points to this player. Remember, in the player class, p is a player, and there is a setPoints method which takes an integer and updates the points scored. So that's what's happening there. So there is a solution to the addPoints method of the team class. A defender is a player. Write the entire defender class. So let's go into my defender class. Public class defender is a player. Okay? And we know that every player has a name and a position, and we don't know anything else about defenders. We haven't been told if there's any new properties or behavior. So in our constructor method for a defender, I'm just going to assume that because it is a player, it has a name and position. Now, as you can see, this signature of the defender constructor method is the same as the signature of the player. A defender is a player. So we need two things. We need a name and we need a position. And we're going to send that information to the super constructor. So in our constructor method, we're just going to say, hey, superclass, player class, please take care of these two pieces of information. Okay, so there's one solution. Here's another solution, which was suggested to me by one of my students, and I thought it was very smart, so I'm going to include it. Every player has a name, but we know that a defender is a defender. So why don't we do this? We're going to call the superclass, we're going to give it the name, and we're going to give it the position. Because the superclass constructor method, the player class constructor method needs a string and a string. So that would also work. Okay? Okay, let's move on. An attacker is also a player, but an attacker has an aggression index. And when constructing a new attacker, this value is set to 5. Okay? So the attacker is a player, but does have an extra property that most players don't have. So let's go into the attacker class. Again, an attacker is a player. It has an extra property. And when we construct an attacker, every attacker is a player, so every attacker has a name and a position. So let's send that information to the player class's constructor method, the super constructor. And let's assign the aggression index to a value of 5. Now it could be that the aggression index is not always set to 5, it's also a parameter, so we could do that. I'm going to say int AI, and then aggression index equals AI. That's another way of doing it. Okay, but we are told the aggression index is always set to 5, so let's follow that. Outline one advantage of using inheritance as a strategy in programming. It just means you can reduce the amount of code that needs to be written because we're inheriting from a superclass. Okay, we've reached question H. Here we have the game class. There's one property. It's an array of team objects. If we look at the constructor method, we can see that that array only ever stores 2 team objects. We're going to implement the getHighestScorer method. Now this method is in the same class as this property. So this method can directly manipulate data in this property. Okay? Now we're going to return the name of the player in the game with the highest score. So we need to be able to access player data. We don't need to care about processing nulls because a precondition is both teams have 5 players. And postcondition, if there are multiple players with the same highest score, only one of those players needs to be returned by the method. So from the from the game class, we have a team array, and if we go into the team UML diagram, we can see that we can access the players in the team, because there's a getPlayers method. Very, very useful. Okay, so we will be using that in this solution. Okay, let's get started. So here is the game class, here is the method, and here is the data that this method will process. So solution 1 would be to grab the team at index 0 in the teams array, from that team grab the players, the player array, and then process the player array. Okay, that's really what we want to do. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to go into my teams array, and I'm going to grab the first team. Done. I'm going to assign it to a little local variable inside this method called T1. So I've got my team. I'm now going to grab the players, so T1 is a team, and we can get the players. That returns a player array. So I'm grabbing the players from the team, and I'm assigning that to a player array variable. And now I can process that player array. Okay? So what I want to do is also, I just want to create a variable to store the player name with the highest score, because I need to store that. That's going to be returned later. Okay? And I also need to create a variable to track the highest score. Okay? We will be searching for the highest score in the array. So let's do that. Just going to make it a new empty string as we get started. And I'm going to create the highest score. I'm just going to call it highest and assign that a value of 0 as we get started. Now let's go into our for loop. We're going to be processing the player array, which I've grabbed from the team. Okay? So if P dot get, if PI, which is a player, P is a player array, so PI is one of the players in the array. And we can get the points from that player. And if that's greater than the current highest, we're going to do two things. We're going to update highest to store those points from that player, and we're also going to grab the player name because we need that. Brilliant. Okay, so we've just processed the first team. Now, using the same variables, because we need to process both teams, I'm going to do exactly the same for the second team. I'm going to grab the second team. I'm going to get the players from that team. I'm going to process that array, and I'm going to use the same algorithm to grab the highest score. Okay, so we've processed the first array, we've processed the second array. When we've finished, all we have to do is return whichever player was processed as having the highest score. Okay, so that's one solution to this problem. Another solution to this problem is we're going to do all of this twice. First for the team at index 0, and then for the team at index 1. So why don't we put all of this code in a for loop? Okay, we're going to process both teams. I'm going to take this code here, paste it into my for loop, and change, let's just say T equals teams I. So grab the first team. When I is 0, we're getting team 0. Get the players from that team that we're currently processing. I'm already using I here, so I should really change this, maybe change it to J. Okay, so go into the for loop, grab the first team, grab the players from that team, process that players array, find which player has the highest score in that array, then I becomes 1, so we're going to grab the second team, get the players from that second team, and just find if any of those players have a higher score than the other team. Okay, and when we've finished all that, when that for loop is finished, it's there, we're going to return player. And those are two solutions to question H.